Everyone says I was the neighbor from hell. They ignore what the old woman next door did first. She watched every man I brought home, questioned my visitors, and acted as though she owned the hallway. So yes, I filed noise complaints, and yes, I told the city that her apartment was becoming a health risk. You have to understand that I was not trying to hurt her. I was trying to make the building livable. Every time I heard the voicemail beep, I believed I was finally putting the truth on record. My name is Vanessa Cole. I was 28, and I worked as a junior leasing consultant, so you have to understand that I knew how apartment rules were supposed to work. I told myself I was protecting my privacy, and that was fair considering how Eleanor Reed treated me. I was not asking for anything unreasonable. I only wanted the woman next door to stop acting as if she had authority over my life. It started on Monday, October 5th, in the third-floor hallway of Hawthorne Court, an old building with faded carpet and a shaking elevator. I lived in apartment 3B. Eleanor lived in 3A beside me, and she had been there for 19 years. She was 74, thin, always dressed in old cardigans, and usually pulled a folding grocery cart behind her. The cart often blocked part of the hallway. Eleanor seemed to believe that living there longer than everyone else made her the owner of the floor. She watched who entered and questioned people she did not know. Other tenants called it harmless. I did not. I had grown up with a mother who checked my clothes, read my messages, and always wanted to know who I was meeting. By 28, I had promised myself that nobody would inspect my life again. The night before, I returned home after midnight with Brandon. He was loud, and he entered the wrong front door code twice before I opened the door. Upstairs, he let my apartment door slam. Eleanor's door opened almost at once. She stood there in a pale robe and looked from Brandon to me. She asked whether I had given another stranger the building code. She said unfamiliar men walked through the building at night, and decent tenants should consider everyone's safety. She did not shout. That made it worse. Her voice was calm and disappointed, like I was a child who had failed another test. I told Eleanor that my visitors were none of her business. She answered that they became her business when they slammed doors, used the wrong entry code, and woke people after midnight. Then she added that a young woman should be more careful about the kind of men she brought home. That was the part I remembered. Not the door. Not the hour. Not the hour. I remembered the way she said young woman, as if being older made her wiser than me. Brandon left less than an hour later. The next morning, I found Eleanor beside the elevator with her cart. It held cat food, discounted bread, and apples. She asked whether I planned to give the building code to every man I met. I told her she needed to stop watching me. She replied that she watched the entrance because someone had once followed a tenant inside. Eleanor was not always cruel. During my first winter at Hawthorne Court, I had locked myself out while snow covered the steps. Marcus Hale, the building manager, had been across town. Eleanor let me wait inside 3A, made tea, lent me a charger, and stayed awake until Marcus arrived. Her apartment was small but clean, with one grey cat sleeping on the radiator. I had thanked her then. But one kind night did not give her permission to control me forever. At work that afternoon, a tenant from one of our luxury properties called about loud music. My supervisor explained that every complaint needed a date, a time, and a clear description. She said repeated reports created a record, and records gave management power to act. I spent the day thinking about that sentence. Eleanor had years of trust because everyone saw her as harmless. I understood paperwork better than she did. I knew which words made a complaint sound serious. When I returned to 3B, her cart still stood beside her door. Near the mailboxes, someone had placed a handwritten note asking residents not to share the entry code. I knew Eleanor had written it. I went inside and called the building complaint number. Marcus's recorded voice explained that every message was automatically dated, stored, and kept for lease disputes. Then I heard the beep. To me, that sound meant the system was ready to listen. I did not accuse Eleanor of anything serious yet. I only said that the elderly tenant in 3A had been interfering with my visitors and creating tension in the hallway. I asked what management did when a tenant repeatedly disturbed a neighbor's peace. Then I ended the call and placed my phone on the counter. You have to understand that I still believed I was giving Eleanor a chance. If she stopped commenting on my life, I would stop there. If she did it again, my next voicemail would include a date, a time, and a complaint Marcus could not ignore. 3 days later, on Thursday, October 8th, I met Tessa Morgan at City Diner after work. You have to understand that I did not go there planning to destroy Eleanor's life. I only wanted advice from someone who understood property rules as well as I did. Tessa worked beside me at the leasing office, and she knew how quickly repeated complaints could change the way a manager looked at a tenant. I told her about Eleanor watching my visitors, leaving notes near the mailboxes, and speaking to me as if I were a teenager. I also mentioned the voicemail I had left for Marcus. Tessa laughed and said Eleanor sounded like an unpaid security guard who had given herself a promotion. That made the situation feel smaller and easier. Tessa asked whether Eleanor actually made noise or only complained about mine. I told her that Eleanor moved furniture, closed doors too hard, and sometimes spoke loudly in the hallway. None of those things had ever kept me awake, but I convinced myself that they were signs of a larger problem. Tessa explained that one complaint usually meant nothing, but several reports with exact dates and times could force management to investigate. She said a written pattern mattered more than one person's opinion. I heard that as permission. That evening, I returned to apartment 3B with a man named Kyle. He brought a small, portable speaker and placed it on my kitchen counter. We played music, drank wine, and argued when he refused to lower the volume. At 2:10 in the morning, he grabbed the speaker, but it slipped from his hand and struck the shared wall. The sound was sharp enough to make both of us stop. Eleanor's cat cried from the other side. Kyle left 5 minutes later, angry because I blamed him for making noise. I stood alone in my kitchen and looked at the wall. That was when I realized the sound could still be useful. It was only one complaint, and that seemed fair considering how many times Eleanor had embarrassed me. I called Marcus's complaint line. His recorded voice repeated that all messages were dated and stored. Then came the beep. I lowered my voice and said the tenant in 3A had been shouting and striking the wall at approximately 2:15 a.m. I added that the noise frightened my guest and made me feel unsafe. I did not say I had seen Eleanor. I only spoke as if there were no other possible explanation. The next morning, Marcus asked me to meet him in his basement office. He sat behind an old metal desk with a yellow notebook open in front of him. He repeated the exact time from my voicemail and asked whether I had personally witnessed Eleanor hitting the wall. I told him I had heard the impact clearly and knew which apartment it came from. He asked whether there had been music in my apartment. I said my guest had played something quietly, but the real disturbance came from 3A. Marcus wrote my answer word for word. I assumed he was strengthening the case against Eleanor. He then printed a courtesy notice asking her to avoid loud activity during quiet hours. It was not an eviction warning, but I watched him place it in an envelope with her apartment number on the front. That envelope felt like proof that the system believed me. When I returned upstairs, Daniel Ruiz from 3C was standing near the elevator in his paramedic uniform. He asked why Marcus had gone into Eleanor's apartment. I said there had been another noise problem during the night. Daniel rubbed his chin and said he had been awake at that time because he was preparing for his shift. He remembered hearing music and a man leaving my apartment, but he did not remember Eleanor shouting. He said it lightly, almost like a joke, and asked whether our walls were sending sound in strange directions. I told myself Daniel had been distracted. Priya Shah came upstairs carrying laundry and heard part of the conversation. She said Eleanor could be difficult, but formal complaints could frighten someone who had nowhere else to go. I answered that being old did not excuse harassment. Priya did not argue. She only looked at Daniel before continuing downstairs. Later that afternoon, Eleanor knocked on my door. She held the courtesy notice with both hands. She asked whether I had reported her. I told her that I had reported what I heard. She said she had been asleep until something struck the wall from my side. Her voice shook when she explained that another complaint could threaten her apartment. She reminded me that her rent was controlled and that she could not afford a new place. For a few seconds, I remembered sitting in her warm kitchen during the snowstorm. Then Eleanor asked whether I was punishing her because she had warned me about strange men. That question removed the sympathy I had started to feel. I told her she was proving my point by coming to my door and questioning me again. She asked me to speak to her before calling management in the future. I refused because I said official records protected everyone. Eleanor returned to 3A without another word. For the next 4 days, she did not comment on my visitors. She moved her folding cart closer to her own door and avoided looking at me in the hallway. The silence felt like success. I had made one recorded complaint, Marcus had issued one notice, and Eleanor had finally learned that I could cause real problems for her. I told myself I would stop if she stayed out of my life. But by Sunday evening, I was already thinking about how much stronger 3 complaints would look than one. On Sunday, October 11th, I decided that one warning was not enough. You have to understand that Eleanor had become quieter, but she had not become respectful. She still watched through the opening of her door whenever one of my visitors passed. I told myself that silence did not mean the problem was solved. It only meant she was waiting for another chance to interfere. That afternoon, I heard furniture scrape against the shared wall. Instead of ignoring it, I took the wooden handle from my broom and struck my side of the wall 3 times. The blows sounded deep and uneven. I recorded the last 2 on my phone. At 8:40 that evening, I called the police non-emergency line and reported that Eleanor was shouting, hitting the wall, and threatening to break through it. I said the situation had been growing worse for days. It was only a stronger version of what I had already reported, and that seemed fair considering how she had treated me first. While I waited, I called Marcus's complaint number. His recorded message again explained that every voicemail was dated and saved. Then the beep sounded. I described the wall strikes, said Eleanor had become aggressive, and asked management to act before someone was hurt. To me, the beep meant I had added another clean piece to the record. 2 police officers arrived 20 minutes later. Their radios and heavy steps brought people into the 3rd-floor hallway. Eleanor opened her door wearing a blue robe, with her grey cat behind her ankles. One officer asked whether she had been shouting or hitting the wall. Eleanor said she had moved a chair in the afternoon but had been watching television since dinner. Her apartment was quiet. The wall had no marks. I stood outside 3B and told the officers that Eleanor always became calm when authority arrived. Daniel came out of 3C. He asked what time I had heard the screaming. I told him it had continued for almost 40 minutes. Daniel said he had been awake before his night shift and had heard no screaming. He had heard knocks, but they seemed to come from my apartment. This time he did not joke. He asked directly whether I was certain. I answered that he did not share a wall with Eleanor, so he could not know what I heard. I convinced myself he was defending her because she was old. Priya came upstairs from the front lobby after hearing the police. She stood beside Daniel and asked Eleanor whether she needed help. That annoyed me because nobody asked whether I felt safe. I told Priya that Eleanor had been unstable for weeks and that the building needed to stop excusing her behavior. Eleanor held the handle of her folding grocery cart. Inside it were a folder of official letters, 2 cans of cat food, and a bag of rice. The cart no longer looked like simple hallway clutter. She had packed her papers into it because she was afraid someone would ask her to leave. I noticed that, but I decided it was another performance. One officer told me they could not confirm an active disturbance. He said the visit would still be documented. I heard the word documented and felt relieved. Daniel remained after they left and asked why every serious incident happened when nobody else heard it. I told him that was how private harassment worked. Priya asked whether there were concerns besides noise. I looked at Eleanor's cart and saw the cat food. I said Eleanor might be bringing stray cats into the building. I claimed I had noticed insects near her door and a strong animal smell. Priya's face changed because she had a young daughter downstairs. She asked whether I had actually seen cats enter 3A. I said I had seen enough to be concerned. Eleanor said she owned 1 cat and sometimes fed 2 outdoor cats behind the building. She asked why I was turning every ordinary thing she did into a danger. Her hands shook around the cart handle. For 1 second, I remembered those hands placing warm tea in front of me during the snowstorm. Then she said this had started because she asked me not to bring unknown men through the building at night. The anger returned. I told her she was still trying to control my private life. Tessa called while everyone returned to their apartments. I told her the police had come and that I had raised the cat issue. She became quiet and asked whether there were really insects. I said there could be, and waiting for proof would be irresponsible. Tessa said involving health officials would make the situation much more serious. I heard hesitation in her voice, but I treated it as fear. I was the one willing to finish what we had discussed. Before going inside, I looked at Eleanor's folding cart beside 3A and decided the next complaint would not be about noise. If the police could not remove her, the city health department might. 6 days after the police visit, on Saturday, October 17th, a city health inspector and an animal control officer arrived at Hawthorne Court. You have to understand that I expected them to find something. Eleanor bought cat food every week, fed animals behind the building, and kept her door closed whenever anyone walked past. I told myself that people did not hide ordinary things so carefully. Marcus met the officers in the third-floor hallway and asked me to wait outside apartment 3A while they inspected it. Eleanor opened the door wearing her cleaning uniform. Her face looked tired, and her grey cat stood beside her feet. I explained that I had noticed insects, an animal smell, and signs that stray cats were being brought inside. The inspector asked whether I had entered the apartment recently. I said I had not, but I knew what I had seen near the door. Eleanor looked at me without speaking. The officers went inside, and Marcus left the door partly open. From the hallway, I could see more of the apartment than I had seen since the winter night when Eleanor helped me. There were no piles of trash. No animals ran between the rooms. The kitchen floor was clean, the food was sealed in plastic containers, and one small litter box stood beside the bathroom. The animal control officer scanned the grey cat's registration tag and confirmed that Eleanor owned only one pet. The health inspector checked under the sink, behind the refrigerator, and along the walls. He found no insects, no waste, and no dangerous conditions. I said Eleanor must have cleaned before they arrived. Marcus asked how she could have known the exact inspection time when even he had received the call that morning. I answered that someone from the city could have warned her. It was only reasonable to consider every possibility. While the inspector wrote his report, I noticed Eleanor's refrigerator. It held half a carton of eggs, a small container of soup, milk, and 2 apples. On the table were a pill organizer, a stack of discount coupons, and an envelope marked November rent. Her folding grocery cart stood near the door with her cleaning shoes inside it. Eleanor told the inspector that she cleaned a dental office on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She said the work was difficult now, but the extra money helped her buy food and keep the apartment. She explained that her rent was controlled because she had lived at Hawthorne Court for 19 years. Without it, she could not afford another home in the city. For a moment, I saw the situation differently. I saw an old woman who measured food, saved every dollar, and feared every official envelope. I understood that an eviction would not force her to find a nicer apartment. It might leave her with nowhere to go. Then Eleanor looked at me and said, "None of this would have happened if I had stopped bringing unknown men into the building at night." She added that a responsible tenant did not give the entrance code to every new visitor. That was enough to close the small space where sympathy had started. I told her that she was still judging me, even while officials stood inside her home because of her own behavior. The inspector gave Marcus a clean report. I watched him place it inside a folder. There was no voicemail beep this time, but I knew the report would join the same record I had been building. I convinced myself that one clean inspection did not erase everything else. That evening, Marcus held a tenants' meeting in the basement laundry room. Priya sat beside one of the washing machines with a notebook. Daniel stood near the dryer, still wearing part of his paramedic uniform. Eleanor remained close to the door with her grocery cart and folder of letters. Marcus said management needed to discuss the repeated complaints on the 3rd floor. Priya asked me whether I had personally seen stray cats enter apartment 3A. I said I had reported a reasonable concern, not claimed to be inside Eleanor's home. Priya reminded me that I had mentioned insects, disease, and a strong smell. I answered that health risks should be checked before someone became sick. Daniel said the strongest late-night noise usually came from my apartment. He mentioned music, slammed doors, arguments, and men pressing the wrong entrance buttons. I told him my visitors had nothing to do with Eleanor striking the wall. He asked why the police report said they had found no disturbance and no damage. His voice was no longer friendly. Tessa had been invited because I had once suggested she knew about the complaints, but she did not come. She sent me a message saying she did not want to be involved in a building dispute she had never witnessed. I read it twice and put my phone away. I decided she was protecting herself because the situation had become serious. Marcus asked Eleanor whether she had ever commented on my visitors. Eleanor admitted that she had. She said she had spoken in a rude and old-fashioned way because she worried about strangers entering the building. That admission gave me the one point I knew was true. I told everyone that Eleanor had watched me, embarrassed me, and treated me as if I had no right to live freely in my own apartment. I said nobody would accept that behavior from a younger tenant. Eleanor lowered her eyes and said she should not have judged my private life. Then she added that her rude comments did not make the police complaints, threats, insects, or damaged walls real. Marcus placed a printed list of my calls on the folding table. He asked me to sign a formal statement confirming that the information I had reported was accurate to the best of my knowledge. I saw the dates, the times, and short parts of my own voicemail descriptions. Every beep had created another line. To me, the pages looked like a complete case against Eleanor. I signed at the bottom. Priya closed her notebook. Daniel walked out without looking at me. Eleanor held the handle of her grocery cart and asked that I stop knocking on her door or speaking to her without Marcus present. I agreed because I thought she was finally afraid. The inspection had failed to remove her, but the signed statement made everything official. I only needed one final incident, serious enough that Marcus could no longer call it a personal disagreement. On Friday, October 23rd, 3 days before the property owner's review, I decided to create the one incident Marcus could not dismiss. You have to understand that I had already tried the reasonable options. I had reported noise, requested police help, contacted the health department, and signed a formal statement. Eleanor was still in apartment 3A, still watching the hallway, and still acting as if her 19 years in the building gave her more rights than me. I told myself that one final complaint was fair considering how many chances she had received. That evening, I invited Tessa and 2 men from work to apartment 3B. I wanted witnesses nearby, even if they did not see every part of what happened. We played music and drank in my kitchen. Around 10, one of the men asked why I kept looking toward the wall. I explained that the elderly woman next door had been harassing me for weeks. Tessa did not laugh this time. She reminded me that the health inspection had found nothing and said I should wait for Monday's review. I told her management needed something clear before Monday, not another uncertain story. At 11, the men left. One of them closed the apartment door too hard, and the sound echoed through the hallway. I waited until their footsteps disappeared. Then I stepped outside and knocked on Eleanor's door. She did not answer. I knocked again, louder. Her grey cat moved behind the door, and I heard Eleanor ask me to leave. I told her I wanted to settle the issue before the owner's meeting. She said all communication had to go through Marcus. I reminded her that she had started the conflict by questioning my visitors and insulting the way I lived. Eleanor answered that she had already admitted her comments were rude. She said that did not make my complaints true. That was the one accusation I could not deny. She had judged me. She had embarrassed me in front of men I invited home. She had acted as if an older woman had the right to decide whether a younger tenant was respectable. I told her that none of this would have happened if she had stayed out of my life. Eleanor did not open the door. She asked me once more to stop knocking and said she would call Marcus if I continued. Her refusal felt like another attempt to control the conversation. I returned to 3B, picked up the broom handle, and struck the shared wall several times. Then I pushed a kitchen chair onto its side. The crash sounded heavy enough to travel into the hallway. Tessa stood near the counter with her coat in her hands. She asked what I was doing. I told her I was proving how easily Eleanor could frighten someone through the wall. Tessa said Eleanor had not made the sound. I answered that the result mattered more than the exact moment. Eleanor had created the situation, and I was only documenting what living beside her felt like. I called the police non-emergency line and said Eleanor had threatened to poison me, pounded on the wall, and tried to force open my door. I added that she seemed confused and aggressive. Tessa stared at me but said nothing. After that call, I contacted Marcus's complaint voicemail. His recorded voice repeated that every message was automatically dated and saved. Then came the beep. I described the alleged threat slowly, giving exact times and details. I said Eleanor had struck the wall at 11:18, shouted outside my apartment, and pulled at my door handle. I asked management to remove her before someone was harmed. When I finished, I pressed the button on the side of my phone. The screen went dark, and I placed it on the counter. I assumed the call had ended. Tessa asked why I had claimed Eleanor tried to enter when she had never opened her own door. I told her it did not matter because Eleanor had already shown what kind of person she was. I said I only needed one more official complaint to push management into action. Once Eleanor was gone, I could bring home anyone I wanted without being watched, questioned, or treated like a child. Tessa told me not to use her name in any report. She said she had not seen Eleanor threaten me and would not support that version. I accused her of becoming afraid because the plan was finally working. She said she had thought we were joking about an annoying neighbor, not trying to make a poor elderly woman homeless. Then she left without finishing her drink. I convinced myself that Tessa was protecting her job, not Eleanor. Shortly after midnight, 2 police officers arrived. Eleanor opened her door only after Marcus came upstairs. She looked smaller than usual, with her folder of letters pressed against her chest. The officers checked both doors and found no damage. Eleanor said I had knocked repeatedly, but she had never entered the hallway. I repeated that she had threatened me through the door and tried to break into 3B. Daniel stepped out of his apartment and said he had heard me knocking first. He refused when I asked him to confirm the wall pounding came from 3A. Priya watched from the stairs but did not speak to me. Marcus listened to everyone and remained unusually calm. He asked whether I had left a detailed voicemail. I said I had. He told me to attend a formal meeting in his basement office at 9 on Monday morning. He said the property owner and police representatives would be present so the matter could finally be resolved. To me, his calm voice sounded like acceptance. The voicemail beep had given him exactly what he needed. The next morning, I searched online for furniture that would fit apartment 3A. I imagined one of my friends moving in after Eleanor left. By Sunday night, I had already begun telling people that the apartment next door would probably be empty within a week. On Monday, October 26th, I entered Marcus's basement office at 9 in the morning, expecting to watch Eleanor lose apartment 3A. You have to understand that the owner and police were attending, so I assumed the building was finally taking my reports seriously. Eleanor sat beside her folding grocery cart with her folder on her lap. Daniel stood near the wall. Priya had a notebook. Property owner Miriam Shaw sat behind Marcus's desk, and 2 officers waited beside the door. Tessa was not there. Marcus asked me to repeat what happened Friday night. I said Eleanor had struck the wall, threatened to poison me, and tried to force open my door. One officer asked whether I was certain she had touched the handle. I said I had heard it move. Marcus placed his phone beside a speaker and pressed play. His recorded message explained that every voicemail was dated and saved. Then came the beep I knew so well. My voice filled the office, giving exact times and describing a threat that had never happened. At first, I still believed the recording helped me. Then it continued beyond the point where I thought the call had ended. Tessa's voice asked why I had said Eleanor tried to enter when she had never opened her door. My voice answered that it did not matter. Everyone heard me say I needed one more complaint to push Eleanor out, and that, once she was gone, I could bring home anyone I wanted without being watched. Marcus stopped the recording. Nobody spoke. I said Tessa had misunderstood me. Marcus opened a folder. He said the first complaint described a noise created inside my apartment. He pointed to notes where I had confirmed that I knew the sound came from 3A. He placed the police report beside them, showing no disturbance, no damage, and Daniel's statement that the sound seemed to come from 3B. Then he added the health inspection, which found one registered cat, no insects, and no unsafe conditions. Finally, he placed my signed statement on top. Every beep had not built a case against Eleanor. It had built a dated record of each time my version changed. Daniel told the officers he had been awake during several of the nights I reported, screaming, and had heard only my music, visitors, and door. Priya said I had pressured tenants to agree that Eleanor was dangerous. She described the late-night strangers, the slammed entrance, and the insults I used when neighbors questioned me. Eleanor did not give a speech. She said she had judged my private life and should not have done that, but she had never threatened me, struck my wall, or filled her home with animals. I said that was exactly the point. I told them Eleanor had watched me, embarrassed me, and made me feel unsafe in my own building. Officer Lena Patel said feeling judged did not make a false report true. She turned my signed statement toward me and asked whether I still stood by it. I said the situation was more complicated than the paperwork made it appear. Miriam slid a termination notice across the desk. It listed harassment, repeated disruption, misuse of building systems, and knowingly false statements. Eleanor's tenancy would continue. Mine would not. I looked toward the door, expecting Tessa to arrive and explain that our conversation had been emotional. Marcus showed me her message instead. She said she had never witnessed Eleanor threaten me and would not support any report using her name. One officer told me I would be taken to the precinct for processing related to the false complaints. The legal step lasted only a few hours, but the building had already made its decision. First, my daily routine changed because I moved into a weekly motel across town and added 2 buses to my trip to work. Second, I lost my security deposit, paid for storage, and was forbidden from entering Hawthorne Court without supervision. Third, Tessa stopped answering personal messages, while Daniel and Priya removed me from the tenants group. Fourth, Eleanor remained in 3A and received a written no-contact order that kept me away from her. Fifth, every new rental application required me to explain the termination notice and false report case. I still believed Eleanor had crossed a line when she commented on my visitors. I still believed younger tenants deserved privacy, and that long-term residents should not control a building through age and history. But I had wanted everyone to treat my feelings as evidence while treating her fear as a performance. I called that fairness because the word sounded cleaner than revenge, and I kept using it until the records no longer needed my explanation. A week later, Marcus supervised while I collected my last boxes from 3B. Eleanor's folding grocery cart stood beside her door, exactly where it had always been. Her folding cart stayed beside 3A. My name disappeared from 3B.